Welcome, young scholars. I'm Professor Philo Wisman. You can find me on TikTok and Twitter at PhiloWiz and on Facebook at Professor Philo Wiz. And you can find me on Tinder at Longtime Love. Oh, wait. That's probably TMI for this class. I'll ask your professor to edit that out. Now, shall we begin? Let us break out the wine and cheese, if you are 21, and wax poetic about understanding works of art. When we experience art, we must interact with it on more than just a casual level. We don't just take a glimpse and walk away. We can't really experience it that way. We need to let the art sink in and touch us on multiple levels. Australian art history lecturer Kit Messamure suggests 3 steps for understanding a work of art. We must look to observe what the art looks like, what it's made of, its texture, its design. From this, we can describe it to others. Then we must see, we must find meaning in the symbols in front of us. Again, in the words of Aldous Huxley, as your wise professor has already told you, the more we know, the more we see. Here we see a stained glass window from St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Palo Alto, California. If we don't know the symbolism, we miss out on much of the meaning. There is the symbol in the middle that some people read as XP. But if we understand the symbolism, it's actually the Greek letters chi and rho. I'm sure your sorority and fraternity friends already know this. But chi and rho are the first 2 letters of the word Christos, the Greek word for Christ. And it's this symbol that is called a Christogram, which represents Jesus Christ or the crucifixion. The larger images around the Christogram appear to show a representation of a man, an eagle, a lion, and an ox. Now, for those of you who don't know the symbolism, these living creatures represent the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew is the most human of the Gospels. It is represented by a man. Mark roars like a lion. Luke sort of plods along like an ox and gets the work done. And John is the most mystical of the Gospels. It soars like an eagle. If we go back even farther, we know that those living creatures come from the book of Ezekiel, from Judaism, hundreds of years before Christ. So the more we know, the more we see. After that, Messamure suggests that we think. Now we must do some research. We must understand what the artist was trying to convey. What was going on in the artist's lifetime? What did the artist experience? What were his or her influences? Put together all of these things, and you'll have a better understanding of the work of art that you are observing.
So Professor Wisman gave a great example of looking at art, the stained glass window and the symbolism in the pictures there. Let's look at another example. This is one of my favorite paintings from the Renaissance. This is called the Arnolfini Wedding by Jan or Johannes van Eyck. And when I look at the details, every time I think it must have taken him a whole year to do this. The details are stunningly remarkable. Most of the time I ask my students, what do you see in this picture? And almost all the time they'll say, she's pregnant. Okay, so let me explain this. This gentleman, Arnolfini, is a courtier of King Philip of the Netherlands. So he is a Dutch nobleman. And he is marrying this woman on the right. I don't know her name. They obviously didn't have wedding photographers back then, but this portrait was depicting the marriage ceremony of this courtier, Arnolfini, and his bride. Now, the bride was not actually pregnant. And as we find out, learning more from this picture and more about this picture, the symbolism here is designed to imply that there will be a pregnancy in the future, that that this noble, Mr. Arnolfini, will be able to carry on his family name through a child born to this woman. Unfortunately, that was not the case. He ended up not having children, and so this was wishful thinking on the part of the artist and on the nobleman. So let's see what Linda Seidel, an art historian, says about this. Hammer time. Stop. Hammer time. All right. So Linda Seidel says, meaning is neither given nor found, but that it takes shape arbitrarily, that it's dependent upon associations and circumstances that scholars, artists, and viewers, that's us, bring to their engagement with paintings. It's not constructed by any one of them alone, although each of us is responsible for the orchestration of our own responses. So we do bring our own interpretations and we orchestrate our own responses, but we have to also rely, at least in part, on the artist and what scholars have written about the work of art. Let's take a closer look at some of the details on this incredible painting. So we see a chandelier here and a mirror. We see prayer beads, and we see a carving on the bedpost. It's Saint Margaret, who happens to be the patron saint of childbirth. So you can tell that Arnolfini was really, really keen on having a male offspring. He wanted children. So the patron saint of childbirth is on the bedpost, carved here. There's a whisk broom also hanging from the bedpost, which, according to Gardner's Art Through the Ages, that is symbolic of domestic care. And we see prayer beads in the painting. So the prayer beads indicate that they are religious people, that they are people who are earnestly praying to God to have a child. So let's take a closer look at the mirror. What do we see here? There's the signature above the mirror. This is Johannes van Eyck. His artwork is so good that his signature is memorable. But look at the details in the mirror. What do we see? We can tell that it's a round mirror because we see the curvature in the window. We also see a reflection that shows the artist himself and another witness to the wedding in the background. And then we see the backside of the two participants, the bride and the groom. So pretty incredible detail. We also see, if you notice closely, this is a little darker, he even gets the light reflecting on each of these individual glass circles around the main mirror. And each of these little circles contains a tiny picture depicting scenes from Christ's Passion. The mirror can symbolize God's all-seeing eye. The chandelier with one candle lit. If we look at this chandelier, why is there only one? Well, perhaps it symbolizes unity. Today, we have a ceremony at weddings where the bride and the groom will light what is called a unity candle. And they will take two candles that represent their own life and touch a new candle together and light them at the same time, which symbolizes their new life together. So it's possible that it symbolizes unity, or it may also symbolize the all-seeing eye of God. Another symbol is a symbol of fidelity, a dog, a faithful companion. But this may also symbolize wealth because the dog is a rare breed. Not everyone could afford to have this dog. Not everyone could afford, this is called an Affenpinscher. It's a rare breed of dog. If we go back to the big picture, underneath the window, we see oranges. Now to us, big deal. But to 15th century Dutch people that lived in the Netherlands, far, far away from the Caribbean and the warm islands where oranges grow, this was an expensive fruit. So it symbolized wealth. And if we look down in the bottom left corner, we'll see a pair of clogs, Dutch shoes. And it is said that these clogs symbolize holiness, the holiness of the marriage ceremony. So again, they're taking their religion seriously. Now you may ask, how do shoes on the floor symbolize holiness? Well, let's think back into literature, into religion, And we'll think about the story of Moses at the burning bush. As it tells us in the book of Exodus, Moses was tending his sheep when he saw a bush that caught fire but wasn't burning up. It was burning, but it wasn't consumed by the flames. And he went over to take a closer look. And he heard the voice of God speak to him. And the voice of God said, "Moses, take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground." So removing the sandals is a symbol of holiness and respect and reverence. So all of these things are illustrated in this portrait. And if we didn't understand the symbolism, if somebody didn't tell us what these things stood for in 1434, we would never know. So once again, the more we know, the more we see, the more we can understand and explain and know what an artist's intentions were. So it was clearly intended here that he wanted to make a portrait that would imply fertility and childbirth for Arnolfini and his bride. But while his name didn't carry on through children, his name carries on through this incredible work of art by Johannes van Eyck, one of the Dutch masters from the Renaissance. So when we look at art, we need to bring our own perspective to it, but we also need to look at the larger picture. We have to do some research. We have to understand the context in which the painting was created. We have to understand what was going on in the artist's head at the time, what the artist's intentions were. We have to understand what the symbolism in the scenery is. So I'm going to let you ruminate on this poem by John Godfrey Saxe. It's a poem based on a famous Indian tradition that's used in Hinduism as well as Buddhism. Saxe uses it to discuss religious debates going on in the 1800s in the United States. Here's the poem, and you can tell from the imagery I put on the screen that the poem is famous. There's so many images you can find on Google, which is what I did, that it's easy to illustrate this poem. I'll do my best to read it. Shall I use a dramatic voice? I ask my children, shall I use my British voice? How about my Southern voice? I don't think I want to use the Southern voice for this one. How about my New York City, Brooklyn voice? Hey, it was 6 men of Indostan. No, Daddy, use your normal voice. That's what the kids say. But anyway, it was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl. God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall. The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp? To me 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear. The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up he spake. I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a snake. The fourth reached out an eager hand and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain, quoth he. 'Tis clear enough, the elephant is very like a tree. The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, Even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact, who can? This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope. And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. And then Saxe adds a moral to the story. So oft, meaning so often theologic wars, the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen. So if we think about that, art has more meaning than what we bring to it. We see a part of the picture, just like these blind men of Indostan. So when we examine art, when we experience art, we need to look at it more deeply. We need to research, we need to reflect, and we need to try to understand. Or in the words of Kit Messamure, look, see, and think about the work of art.